Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 760B, and today's date is September 7th, 2015, and the title of this episode is The U.S. Prepares Ground Troops and Puts Pressure on Greece to Block Russian Flights to Syria. Let's get right into the economic collapse geopolitical news. Now, we understand that this collapse is getting closer by the minute. I mean, we can just see what's going on around the world at this point. And we know the American government, the central bankers, the first thing on their agenda is to try to remove the weapons from the people. And Obama has come out and said the last year of his presidency, this is his main goal. And we understand that representatives of the U.S. government met with a delegation in Mexico talking about the arms trade treaty, the UN arms trade treaty. And this is about getting weapons away from the everyday person. Assistant Secretary of State Thomas Countryman represented the United States at the conference. He made it very clear in his official statement that he was on board with accelerating the move to give teeth to this gun grab. So they're pushing this forward. We know that John Kerry already signed it. It just hasn't been ratified by the Senate. And this is what they're trying to do right now. And Obama is saying that he wants to do this in the next year. Now, to understand how bad this is, the arms trade treaty grants a monopoly over all weaponry. The treaty leaves private citizens powerless. Article 2 of the treaty defines the scope of the treaty's prohibitions. The right to own, buy, sell, trade, or transfer all means of armed resistance, including handguns, is denied to civilians by this section of the Arms Trade Treaty. Article 3 places the munitions fired, launched, or delivered by the conventional arms covered under Article 2 within the scope of the treaty's prohibitions as well. Article 4 rounds out the regulations, also playing all parts and components of weapons within the scheme of Article 5, under the title of General Implementation. Article 5 mandates that all countries participating in the treaty shall establish and maintain control using a national control system, including a national control type of list or database. And if we look back at the executive orders that Obama has signed, they meet all of this. They have already prepared to have this ratified. And of course, they're going to say, well, this is done at the UN level, so this overrides the rights of the people, which it doesn't. Because rights are not privileges. You are born with these rights, and these cannot be taken away by anything else. They cannot be infringed upon. But they're going to try to convince the American people that, yes, we have to abide by this. We have to set up the centralized database. We need to control the weapons. Everyone needs to be tracked. And this is a complete infringement on everyone's rights. And we see at this point in time that people realize that they better get their weapons right now. And we see from the FBI August 2015 database for background checks, August was by far the largest number of background checks for any August since background checks began in 1998. 1.7 million background checks. Now, when you get one background check and you go into a gun store, that doesn't mean that person's buying one weapon, because once the background check is done, you can buy as many weapons as you want. So this number showing that 1.7 million background checks were done, that doesn't mean it's only 1.7 million weapons. It could be double or triple that, depending on what the people purchased. So we have to remember what is happening here. People realize that something is wrong in this world, with their economy, with the government, and people are purchasing weapons. And we have to remember, a population that does not have a weapon is a controlled population. A population that is holding a weapon is a population that controls the government. That is the difference here. Our founding fathers knew this. That's why they put freedom of speech then the Second Amendment, you have the right to bear arms. Because that Second Amendment backs up the first one. And we understand at this point, the government realizes that they need to remove the weapons from the people to control them. This has been an ongoing task of the U.S. government central bankers for many years. And they know they can't override the Second Amendment. And this is why they're continually creating thousands upon thousands of laws that actually infringe upon the rights of the people. And they're trying to use this UN Arms Trade Treaty to get around this. But it's not going to work. They're also trying to remove the freedom to have privacy. I mean, look what they're doing right now. Many colleges have certain areas where you can speak freely. They have them cordoned off. If you're protesting, you can't protest near a politician unless you're something like 100-something feet away. If you're going to protest, you have to be protesting in a constitutional free speech zone. This is what they're trying to do at this point. And they're saying that, yes, if we believe that you are suspected of something because someone reported you, we have the right to pat you down and to search you, which they don't. And they just don't do this physically. They do this electronically, which they do not have the right. And if we look at this, we see that Keith Alexander, the FBI Director Comey, they're continually pushing the idea that they have the right to spy on the American people. And actually, Glenn Greenwald was having a debate with Keith Alexander, and Keith Alexander was saying, you know, we don't need the back doors. We don't want back doors into the system because, you know, that will allow criminals. We want front doors. We want full-on access. Right up front. But the difference is there is no difference because they need some type of security to get through. And if that is a hole into the system, and if someone finds that hole, they can basically hack into it and do whatever they want. But what they're saying here is they want the ability to spy on every single person right up front. They're not even going to hide it anymore. And this is why it's everyone's responsibility to basically keep your information private. I mean, you can use Startpage at startpage.com. You can go there. It's a search engine which plugs into Google. But what it does, it hides your searches of where they're coming from, who's doing it. You can actually use a proxy server to hide your location. You can write your own encryption where it will hide your message. Make sure you don't give out your method or your key. Don't use the off-the-shelf encryption because the government already knows the method and it's very easy to find out the key. For your driver's license, for your credit cards that have the RFID chips in it, a good way of blocking them from tracking you or getting that information, or even from criminals using those scanners when you're walking down the street where they can just scan and get your credit card information. You can use blockitpocket.com. I mean, they have sleeves that are made up of silver, copper, interwoven into a fabric, which blocks the signal. You can also use it for your phone, which will block the signal so they can't track where you're going. So there are many different ways that you can do this. And I think everyone at this point in time needs to take responsibility in protecting themselves and making sure the government cannot spy on you. Just like you wouldn't give them the keys to your house, the combination to your safe. You wouldn't tell the government where all your valuables are because your information is private. This is why you seal envelopes when you mail them, because you want it kept private. If not, you would just fold it and put it in the mail. And who cares who read it? Now, we understand that the United States, Canada, Australia, and many other nations are becoming very fascistic. And we see, coming from Canada, he's a constitutional lawyer, Rocco Galletti, and he's saying that Bill C-51, which is now law, transforms Canada into a fascist state, complete with a modern-day Gestapo. Galati explains that the powers and consequences of C-51 in these words. It takes all our private information and shares it with the government agencies, including foreign governments. For some citizens, that becomes an eventuality of torture and or death when traveling abroad. It restricts arbitrarily who can travel, freedom of expression and political criticism with respect to terrorism, and the government's role becomes a terrorist offense in itself. So words and thoughts become an act of terrorism under this bill. It allows CSIS to disrupt covertly constitutionally protected rights of association, expression, and protest. It does all of this by taking away all and any transparent judicial oversight. He says that we've entered into the final fascist state. And we're not just seeing this in Canada. If you hear what he's saying, it's happening in the United States, in Australia, the European nations, the UK. It's happening everywhere. And we see this happening all over the place. And it's happening faster and faster. Now, out in South Korea, they're having a biological attack drill with the United States. And they're practicing for some type of an attack coming from the north. I mean, you can see what's happening at this point. We are heading into World War III territory. Ukraine is preparing to default on Russian loans. Of course, Russia didn't want to work with Ukraine about restructuring their debt because under Russian law, it says that they cannot, because the money that was taken to purchase the bonds, the Euro bonds from Ukraine, was out of their national welfare fund. And they're saying, no, we need our money back. And looks like Ukraine is getting ready to default on this. We see that Poroshenko is going to completely ignore the Minsk II agreement. Right now, the ceasefire, the third ceasefire, is kind of holding at this point. Poroshenko is saying we have followed everything in the Minsk II agreement, and we're not going to give the southeastern region a say in anything that we're doing. And we're not going to talk to them either, which is in the Minsk II agreement. Poroshenko says he's working on Plan B. Plan B is what I'm busy working on right now. Although I still have hopes and I'm doing my best to return Ukrainian territories under Ukrainian control, I'm working on Plan B, which we'll have to see what that is. And in my mind, it's a major offensive to get back all the territories because the central bankers are not satisfied in what is happening in Ukraine. Eventually, they might even take him out and replace him because he's not doing what they want. We see in Gaza, they have a major crisis under Israeli blockade. We see the water crisis there is worsening. Under a UN report, over 90% of Gaza water is undrinkable. And the Palestinian territory has only one source of fresh water, that is a coastal aquifer beneath the ground and shared with Israel and Egypt. The document by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development also said that Gaza will become uninhabitable by the end of the decade. So we can see it right now. Gaza is having a huge problem there. The people are suffering, and there is no reason for this. Absolutely no reason whatsoever. We see Austria, we see Germany have acted quickly and humanely in an emergency situation to help around 12,000 refugees because we understand there's a refugee crisis. But there's hundreds of thousands of these people fleeing Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, and especially Syria. We see 11,000 Icelanders are saying that they'll open their homes and allow the refugees to come to Iceland. We see the UK is saying that they will accept 20,000 refugees. We see France will take in 24,000 refugees. But again, there's hundreds of thousands of people who are continually fleeing these areas. This will not be enough. We see in Saudi Arabia, Qatar is bringing in ground troops. Qatar was attacked? No, they weren't. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the coalition forces, do the bidding of the United States. They want the ground troops in Yemen. Saudi Arabia already has ground troops there. Now Qatar, bringing in 1,000 troops into the area to help with the fighting. The airstrikes couldn't do it. We see in Syria, the proxy army for the United States, they have captured an oil field from the government of Syria. And we can see this is what the proxy army has been doing. They've been capturing the important infrastructure and destroying the infrastructure of Syria at the same time. They want the oil refineries, they want the oil fields, and then the manufacturing and everything else is destroyed. They're trying to put pressure on the Syrian government. And we see with Putin and his move to go into Syria. Now, there's a lot of reports out there saying he's flying military jets around. They join the fight. I think he's bringing in military assets right now, setting up the bases. The United States is getting worried because, as we know, Putin is right now playing chess with the United States and the coalition forces. He's moving his piece right now and saying, listen, checkmate, however you want to look at this. I'm going to say it's check because at this point he's saying, okay, I'm here. We're going to fight the Islamic State. You've been telling the world they are a terrorist organization. Here I am. I'm setting up my base. Let's go after them. Let's put together a universal terror fighting force that will go after the Islamic State. And the United States right now is getting nervous and worried because if Putin moves this forward, it will destroy the proxy army. And this means the United States then is fighting Russia. And of course they're saying, well, if Russia does this, this is going to complicate things. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, U.S. Army General Martin Dempsey, said, if they do this, it will complicate what's going on there. It's funny because when the United States went into Syria, China, Russia said the same thing. Isn't this going to complicate what's going on in there? Where you're fighting the Islamic State, we have the Free Syrian Army in there, and Assad is there. Isn't this going to complicate the whole situation? And the United States says, no, we're going to use strategic weaponry to zero in on the terrorist force, and we're not going to hit Assad's force or the infrastructure at all. Don't worry about that. Well, Putin's saying the same thing now. No, it's not going to complicate anything because we're going to use our advanced weaponry to zero in on the forces of the Islamic State. We're not going to hit the Free Syrian Army. Don't worry about it. So right now, the United States is kind of in a corner at this point. And of course, Lavrov is telling Kerry that, it's too early to discuss anything that's going on in Syria. We haven't concealed our supplies, our military equipment. We've always been supplying Damascus with everything. And now we decided to come in there and help our ally because our ally invited us in and said, we need your help. And if you look at the United States, they were not invited in. They invaded a sovereign nation. It's like Mexico coming in and flying jets in the United States and bombing certain areas because the Islamic State's there. Would that go over well? No, it wouldn't. We see the U.S. has taken this a step further. They went to the Greek Foreign Ministry and they said, listen, don't allow Russia to fly humanitarian aid through your airspace to Syria. Now, Greece says they refused to close its airspace to Russia because it would cause tension between them and Russia. And Russia's saying if they did close their airspace, they would have alternate routes, maybe through Iran or other Asian nations. But it will not stop them from sending humanitarian aid. Now, of course, the United States is trying to stop the weapons, the food, the supplies. They want the people, the government there to suffer. And we can see this is the beginning of World War III. Unless Putin somehow can calm the situation, because we know the U.S. government central bankers, they're not going to calm the situation. They're going to escalate the situation. We see France is getting ready to bomb Syria. Now, of course, we have this refugee crisis, which is caused by the U.S. government, the coalition forces, because they have the proxy army inside Syria causing problems. The people are afraid. They don't want to live like this, and they're leaving the country because of war. Now, France is coming in, and they're bombing more of the country. This is not going to help the refugee crisis. This is going to make it worse. We see Britain is getting ready to vote for military action in Syria and Libya. They want to bring in about 20 troops to Libya's border to contain what is going on in Libya. Syria is condemning any UK military interference. Syria has accused the UK of interfering with the government there, with what's going on there. And the Syrian Foreign Ministry has sent 2 letters to United Nations chiefs objecting to brazen standpoints taken by British officials and accusing the UK of colonialist agenda. We're hearing rumblings about troops that might be needed in Syria. The U.S. is going to rethink the strategy for battling the Islamic State in Syria. They're thinking about moving more fighters to the safe zones. This way, they'll be able to improve the skills and the training of rebels. They're thinking about bringing in troops to this area. The options right now, they're saying they're classified, but they're circulating among the top officials of the Department of Defense. And they include enlarging the size of the troops that they're going to train. The coalition forces, like we heard from Kerry, they are getting ready to bring in troops when they are needed. And we understand eventually they're going to have to use some type of an event to get the authorization for war passed. It's just pending in Congress, and they need some type of an event to gain traction on this. So the people, the Congress, say, yes, we need to pass this. And we see already they're prepping for a cyber attack against the financial systems. I mean, we have to remember back to 2010, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, they said they located an attack virus planted by Russian security services inside the NASDAQ stock market system. And we've been seeing glitches ever since. Now, of course, they're using this to make us believe that Russia's attacking the stock market. The question is, why in the world would they want to do this at this point in time? They see the economy here in the United States falling apart already. There would be no reason to do this because guess what? It's going to implode by itself. And we hear reports coming out saying the next level of sophistication in these cyber attacks is that they're going to target bank account record file or stock exchange order system. And once inside of these systems, they can either steal information or shut down the system, or plant sleeper attack viruses that can be activated at a later date. And they put together a scenario of how this could happen. And they're seeing that Russia might do, or China might do something like this when the market is down 3 to 5%. And when it's down like this, they might activate this virus, this malware, to bring the market down another 20% in a single day. And this would mimic 1987 or 1929 stock market crash. So they're already getting prepared and ready to blame this entire thing on Russia or China. And they're saying they've already infiltrated the market systems. We could see where we're headed here. And we can see that war is at our doorstep. They're preparing us for war. They're getting ready for everyone to see that they're going to blame this on Russia and China. Already we have another explosion at a chemical plant in China. Chinese province Zhejiang, we see another chemical plant went up with this huge explosion. It was after midnight their time. So we can see this war is building. It's going from an economic war now to a physical war, where we're seeing these explosions happening in all different areas. Something happens in China, something happens at a U.S. military base. Something happens in China, something happens in Japan. This is continually ongoing right now. And this will accelerate as time goes on. It's not going to get better. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.